we, as everyone is, obviously, as everyone is continuing to eat, because we did invite you to eat, we're not practicing, we're not just showing you the food. So you definitely continue to eat. But we did want to just, first of all, thank everyone for coming and invite everyone. Just to give a little bit of background before I introduce Mr. Stock, this is an event that's being sponsored by the T4 Business Halacha Initiative, which is a project which is co-sponsored by the North Miami Beach Kollel and by the law firms of Stakan Braverman. This has been going on for about 2 years now, where together the law firm with the Kollel has together really identified certain issues in the community, maybe a lot due to lack of awareness and education, primarily focused on business halacha, where there's so many areas that a person who's dealing with the halacha and dealing with business on a daily basis can run into halachic issues, moral issues, and values, and being brought up to date, just hearing a shiur here and there, understanding a little bit more of the issues, hearing from experts, and realizing that there are many resources in the community that can help a person deal with those issues. I think we've seen tremendous strides in that. I think we've seen a lot of people grow from it, and we've seen people be very happy that they're able to feel fulfilled in running their business properly. So today, we will hear a little bit more about the perspective of the initiative from Mr. Stock, who is really behind the entire thing, obviously. And following that, we will hear from Rabbi Bergman, who is a noted dayan, arbitrator, mediator, and a very big expert in these areas. He's Rav in a shul in New York, and we had the schus for him to take out from his very busy schedule to come and give a shiur to us today as well. Just another quick thing, as we continue through the initiative, if anybody wants to host a shiur in their office, or anybody wants to participate on any other level, they can reach out. There's a chat, there's a website, and reach out to Yerachmiel, Yerachmiel Parsons, who, by the way, I just want to publicly thank Yerachmiel for really being behind everything that goes on, and really holding it all together. So anyone can reach out to him for more information about that, for any future events. So I guess at this time we'll call him Mr. Stock to say a few words. Yeah, let me just flip it. You got this?
Don't I have it? Yeah.
It's two different things.
Oh, two different things? Okay. I'm all mic'd up. First of all, I want to thank everyone for coming. This is a wonderful thing to see everybody here coming to our initiative. And I have to thank Rabbi Blezer and Rabbi Singer and Rabbi Parsons, and certainly my partner in crime, Joshua Kahn, whose vision made this happen. And I'm not going to pretend to give a lesson today, because it's way beyond my ken and my capacity, but I will talk about what I learned from this initiative. The initiative is essentially an embryonic outgrowth of our firm, because over the years we've been fortunate enough, we've been blessed to attract a number of very gifted Orthodox attorneys with training in Torah and Talmud that have joined us, and we always want to give a forum to the attorneys in our firm to display their considerable skills, and it seemed as if this initiative would be a wonderful opportunity for us to interact with the community, to spread not only our legal expertise, but our expertise in halacha, to inculcate the community with an influx of the benefits of Jewish law. What I've learned from this initiative is, having come from a perspective of relative ignorance of Jewish law, my major concern was about counseling clients and encouraging them to use a Beis Din, for instance, and not being able to offer them a sense of predictability, because American law is focused on what the outcome will be. What if you do X, then you can expect a judge to rule as Y, because that's the way we analyze the law. Is we look at precedents and we analyze those precedents and say, well, if this is what happened before, this is what should happen in the future. And I was concerned because the Besdin process doesn't offer that system of precedents so that an attorney could predict an outcome. And that was very troubling to me, to be able to not be able to tell my client what the outcome would be. So I learned through this initiative that the major difference, at least as far as I've been able to understand it, is that in halacha, not concerned about necessarily what the judge is going to rule, but we're more concerned about what is morally right, what is correct, what is the best outcome not only for the individuals, but for the community. So if there's an understanding of Torah and the principles of the law, we should be able to predict what the outcome will be, because we're looking at it from a perspective of the immutable characteristics of moral conviction as interpreted by the Torah. And that's basically what I believe that this initiative could offer the business community, which is extremely valuable and worthwhile. So from that perspective, I've come to understand that in a sense, what we offer has much more integrity than the very rich tradition of Anglo-American jurisprudence. So basically, I wanted to impart my understanding upon you, and basically in these introductory remarks. So I thank you all for coming again, and I'll turn it back over to Rabbi Blazer.
Thank you.
Okay.
There you go. Got more? Good? Yeah? Okay. Oh. B'shus, the Rosh HaKoil, Rabbi Blazer, the Rabbanim that are here with us, Mr. Stack, the other members of the firm. I got to meet some of them, and all this whole wonderful group that got together. You know, it's a short period of time. We have 3/4 of an hour to speak, and there are so many different subjects. You know, in the few minutes I was introduced to a few of you, I got to meet some business experts, attorneys in different fields, commercial litigation, bankruptcy, patent law. So perhaps we can take a few moments just to go through some different concepts in halacha, and we'll start in an extremely simple way by going through some basic principles, and from there we'll try to get to some of your individual fields. And please, if any of you have any comments, or if you want me to speak about any specific subjects, just let me know what that subject should be, and we'll gladly go in that direction. You know, as Mr. Stack so poignantly brought out, the Torah is a moral compass, and it's a direction of how we should conduct our lives. So what a wonderful time to get together before the Yom Tov of Shavuos, which is the Kabbalas HaTorah, to speak about the moral compass of how we should be dealing with our finance. I'll just start with a nice little story. You know, you talk about Kabbalas HaTorah. I was on a Besdin, I was Zoicha for many years when I went for Shimish, you know, like they call, you know, our internship, by Rabbi Belsky, Zechron Levracha. He was a brilliant man. And besides, you know, financial matters, matrimonial matters, we dealt with Geiris too. And I once went with him to a Geiris, and sitting on the Besdin of the Geiris, he turns to me and he says, focus on the questions we're going to ask the applicant of what it takes to become a Jew. So you listen to the first question and you say, hey, by the way, you're going to keep Shabbos? That's a strong question. Are you going to recognize Shabbos, right? Do you realize that we don't just live as Jews, we die as Jews? Those are real questions. And then there's a question that's thrown in, which those that learn Yevamah stuff, Mem Zayin, will come across. The question is, do you recognize that in Judaism there's a concept called Leket, Shikha, and Peah? And Leket, Shikha, and Peah is some obscure mitzvah. When you have a field, you leave over a couple of pieces, kernels of wheat for this one, and the corner of your field you leave over. And he stops and he turns to me and he says, can I ask you a question? From all the questions you're asking, most of them are the principles of Judaism. They're real questions, right? And now suddenly you just throw in one mitzvah out of the 613. What's the point of this question? And he paused and he said to me, because there's a lesson that's being taught here. And the lesson that's being taught here is that if you want to be a Jew, you need to recognize that your money doesn't belong to you, it belongs to the other Jew. That's the first message. Now the message is a great message, but that's a message when it comes to doing chesed with others. And as a matter of fact, if you learn Bava Basra and Bava Metzia, you're going to learn a concept called Koifen Oisei Al Midas Sedoim. If I have a chair in front of my house, and you want to sit in my chair, and I don't lose any money. The chair doesn't get ruined by you sitting in my chair. Can I stop you and say it's mine? And the Chachamim came along and they said, no. Koifen Oisei Al Midas Sedoim. We force you to be good to people. There's many, many halachas we learn from that. So that's one side of the halacha. But then comes the second side of the halacha when I say, I would just love to use your item. I'll start with one very classic case. How about this case? We set up a meeting in your house. I get there early. It's a nice hot Florida day. And as I walk into your house, I sit down. What do you do when it's hot? What would you do? Well, we all did here. First we took a drink, right? Anybody wants a drink? Of course you want a drink on a hot day, right? Am I allowed to go into your refrigerator, open your refrigerator without permission, and take out a soda? What would you say to that question? Yes or no? No, I can't. So let me tell you a story. What do you say? Owner said, just wait at my house for me. You called him, I says, you're late to the meeting. He says, just wait. So this very fine gentleman actually answered the question correctly.
The owner of the house said, go and get it, that's all right.
Good. And if the owner does not give me permission?
No.
No. So let me tell you another story that took place. So I once went to somebody's house. And I walked into his house, and I sat there, and I waited for 15 minutes. And 15 minutes later, he walks into the house, and he says, Rabbi, I can't believe it. You sat and you didn't take a drink, you didn't open my refrigerator, and not only that, you didn't even turn on the light. I did the right thing. But he was very upset. And he said to me, didn't you realize that I would definitely allow you to use my item? Didn't you realize that? So what was I supposed to do? Should I have used the item or should I not have used the item? What would you say? They didn't do it.
What's the normal?
What's that?
What's the majority of people who do?
What would the majority of people do?
What's the normal?
So all great questions. So, but Mr. Stock, I have something I want to add for you, Mr. Stock. You see, one of the things which is amazing that we'll learn is that the Torah is what we refer to as nitzchias. And nitzchias means it's eternal and it's forever. And that same Torah that we have already for thousands and thousands of years, you're going to open those Gemaras and those Rishonim, and you'll find all of these questions in there. So let me share with you where the Gemara addresses this question. And I'm just starting with this question, which sounds like quite a simple question, but it's actually the first and most basic question in the moral compass as to when am I allowed to use another person's item without permission? And when can I use another person's item with permission? And then when we understand that, we'll be able to build into the most complex subjects. I was lucky enough to meet a patent attorney here. The intellectual property questions that you deal with will come from this very same question, but we'll get there shortly. So let me read a Gemara to you. A Gemara that took place. This Gemara that I'm about to read is in Masechtas Bava Metzia. I'll read a short story in the Gemara. And by the way, we're being introduced by to a concept, and I appreciate the way you said no, because when you're in the office, can you take another person's pen without his permission off his desk? No. And if you do, what are you? Huh? A ganef? But I love the line I usually get. I only borrowed his item and I intended to return it. So what's your response to that? What do Chazal tell us? Shoyel, shaloi, midas, gazlin. When you take something without permission, that constitutes stealing. So our Torah is a very, very beautiful Torah, but we sort of have two contradictory concepts which we're going to address. On one hand, we say, I have money, so I should share with you. On the other hand, we say that if you have an item, unless I know for sure you give me permission, I can't use it. So which one is correct? So let's understand the sources a bit better. The Gemara in Bava Metzia, Chav Beis Amud Aleph, 22a, tells us the following story. The story goes that Ameima, Mazutra, and Ravashi, three great Amoraim, all three together meet in a bustana. A bustana is an orchard that belonged to Mori Bar Isik. So Mori Bar Isik meets these three great rabbis in the orchard, and Mori Bar Isik is the owner, but he doesn't meet them. The Oris meets them. Who is the Oris? Let's call it the sharecropper, or the person who was running the show. So these three great rabbis walk in, and as these three great rabbis walk in, what is the first thing he does? He serves everybody a platter of fruit. The Gemara shares with us that two of those Amoraim, like they say, started to eat, and they enjoyed it very, very much. And the third one said, no, absolutely not. I'm not going to take part in this fruit, and he left the fruit on the table. And they turned to him and they said, well, why won't you eat? And he just looked at them and said, how can I eat? Who served the food? The worker. Who does the food belong to? The owner. He didn't serve me. This is stealing. That's the way the Gemara starts. So, a few minutes later, who shows up? Mori Bar Isik, the owner, the big boss, shows up. And Mori Bar Isik turns to the none other than his Oris, and he says, are you kidding? These rabbis came and that's the fruit you gave him? You should have given him the best stuff. Why'd you give him that fruit? And at that moment, the other two Amoraim turned to the third one who wasn't eating, and they said, you see? So why don't you eat something now? And he says, nah, he doesn't really mean it. He's just saying so because he's embarrassed because the food was served to the rabbis. He should have gotten better food. Start thinking about a moral compass, sensitivity to halacha about another person's dollar that's in your pocket. Does that person's dollar belong in your pocket or not? Tosfos on this Gemara has the following question, and if you really want to understand the sugya well, those who really want to get deeply involved in the sugya, there is another parallel sugya which speaks about the concepts of truma. Truma was what was separated, a tithe was separated from everybody's food, especially back in the days in Eretz Yisrael and where fruit was grown. They had to separate truma. The question was, are you allowed to separate truma on somebody else's food? That's the question that the Gemara in Masechtas Bava Metzia addresses. And the Gemara in Masechtas Bava Metzia says, no, if you're not a shliach, you cannot separate. If you weren't an agent of the owner, you can't separate. And then the Gemara discusses the following question. The Gemara says, and Tosfos discusses, but 1 second, how about if when the owner came and he saw you already separated the truma, he said, Klach eitz liyafis, why didn't you take the best stuff for the kohen? And the Gemara says, no, it still doesn't work. So Tosfos shares with us a very important principle. And I want everyone to hear this principle because this principle can be used as a foundation in many areas of law. There is a concept that when we find something as a yid, there's a concept called yish shaloi midas loy have yish. Let's go through this concept. The concept is as follows. If I'm walking in the street and I find an item and the owner was already miyayish. What does it mean to be miyayish? He gave up. And how do you determine giving up? He says, Vaila chasar and kiss. What does that mean, Vaila chasar and kiss? He says, oh, what a shame, I lost the money. I'm out, this money is out of pocket. And the classic case of Vail Chasar and Kif is when it's an item that Adam Asi Lamashmish Bekisei B'chol Shah. You constantly touch your pockets and you say, I got my wallet on me, got my wallet. If you lose your wallet, you know about it very quickly. So you find somebody's wallet, there's no siman. The halacha is, if there's no siman, you're allowed to keep it. Now, what would happen if when I find that item, it is before Yish, it's before he gave up? So then, Chazal refer to it as Be'isura Asa Liyadei. When you received it in your hand, it became incumbent upon you, an obligation to return it, and you need to return it. There's no way you can get out of returning that item. Now I'm stuck to return it forever. Think about it for a moment, and I'll just, I see there's a lot of Rabbanim here in the room. I'll just throw out a question, which probably most of you never thought of. You know, there are certain Avedas that you have an obligation to return for life. Can you tell me why when people die, people fight over inheritance? Why is nobody ever fighting over those Avedas that their parents found that they were obligated for the rest of their life to return? Where are all of those Avedas? What happened to them? So I'm not going to leave you suspended with the question. Ramosha Feinstein was bothered by this question. And Ramosha Feinstein actually said that when you find an Aveda that you're obligated to return, what you should do is, after a certain amount of time, if you see the owner is not showing up, you should record it in your diary that I found this and this item, this and this is the value. If the owner ever comes, I'll pay out of pocket. And then you can actually dispose of it. But till then, you should actually be holding on to it. But there's a concept called yish. And yish, there's yish before you can find it before yish, you can find it after yish. But if you find something before yish, you need to return it. But one moment, when the person actually realizes that it's lost, he will be miyayish later. But the answer is that when it came into your pocket, when you actually received it in the first place, what happened? You already got a chiyuv hashava, you have a chiyuv to return. Your chiyuv to return is there forever. And this concept is an extremely important concept to understand when you're looking for a moral compass to decide if I'm allowed to use something or not. And the explanation that I'm going to give is the explanation that's written in the Sefer Oinig Yontif. The Oinig Yontif was one of the brilliant writers. He discusses this Taisvis, and he says, 1 second, he says, think for a moment, he says, when I walk into your house, now I'm going to go address the question, I'm going to explain why you were correct with your answer. And I open up your fridge, and I take out a soda, and you don't even know that I'm there. And then when you come home, you say, I'm so thrilled you took a soda. Think about what happened. When I took the soda, it was before Yish. When you came home, you acknowledged and you acquiesced, you agreed, that's after Yish. So I took something when it was stolen property. And now, when I am actually getting your permission, it's too late. So the answer is you can never take another person's item without permission if he doesn't know about it, but not never. This rule has many exceptions to the rule. And why don't we talk about a few of the exceptions to the rule that we should get a better understanding what do people actually do. So if I was to walk into your house and your child serves me a slice of bread, can I eat that slice of bread that your child served me if you're not home? How about that question? Can I go into your house and take a slice of bread and eat it if your child served it to me? I'll ask you another question. I had this following story happen to me. This is a real story. I was in Toronto. Shabbos morning, I went to daven in the Koil in Toronto. Reb Shlomo Miller is the Rav there. I actually asked him this question. So I walked in, middle of davening, I walked out, I went to the restroom, I took off my talis, I put it down. After I put down my talis, I walk out, but when I put it down, I saw somebody else also put his talis down. When I came back, you know what happened? My talis was not there, his talis was there. Now I got to go back to daven. Am I allowed to take his talis in exchange for mine? How would you address that question?
I would say no.
You would say no. So let me make the question more difficult for you. You walk into the shul, or you walk into any building, and it's a pouring rain, and you hang up your raincoat, and on the way out, somebody took the exact same raincoat, and he left his for yours. Can you walk out with his raincoat?
No.
The answer is no again. Oh, so now we're getting pulled back into the old discussions. Which means midas hadayim. I don't know if I agree with that. I'll tell you why. Because if he comes back, what's that? Means that everybody wants this transaction to go through because nobody loses, everybody wins, right? Oh, we're going into a third subject now, and I appreciate that. So we'll go to the third. We'll go to the third subject. That's an excellent subject. I want to tell you something. The raincoat answer is actually no. For some odd reason, when I asked Rav Shlomo Miller this question, and I asked him how should I finish davening, he said to me, "No problem. You can wear the other person's talis." And we'll get to the talis soon because the talis is actually a different discussion. We'll get to it soon. But let's just go back and finish this subject before we go to the question of talis. And then I want to talk a bit about intellectual property too, because it's really the same question. So this specific question that I just mentioned about when are you allowed to use another person's possession without permission? So I'll share with you a story. The story happened by the Eshel Avram. This Eshel Avram is not a Choshen Mishpat. There was a town in Europe. The name of the town, it depends. If you're Hasidish, you call it Bachuch. If you're Litvish, you call it Bachach. Okay? That's the way they pronounce the name of this town. And a great writer, his name was the Eshel Avram. His footnotes are in the Shulchan Aruch. There's actually a story that he writes about himself. The story goes like this. He says he would, on a regular basis, when he got older, he didn't hear that well. So, but it came to Kriyas HaTorah, he wanted to be able to hear the reading of the Torah portion properly. So he sat in the front of the shul, and he would get up, and he would walk over in front of the bima where they're reading the Sefer Torah, and he would walk over on a daily basis, and he would look into somebody else's siddur, somebody else's prayer book in the siddur every time that he came. So one time, there was a morning where he came to read in somebody else's prayer book and somebody else's siddur, and you know what happened? The person wasn't there that day. And he writes, even though he wasn't there, I used his siddur that day. So now I need you all to stop and tell me, what was different about this case? Why was this case suddenly acceptable?
Because it was already like a custom. It was like
Good. And I'll first quote the Hebrew phrase, and then we'll give the explanation exactly the way you gave it. There's a concept called rugel. And rugel means it was common. It was already a regular practice. So which means that if I was to go back just to the simple case, if I walk into your house regularly, and every time I walk into your house, you open the door and you give me a soda, and it's accepted already that I should take a soda, then there's no problem. Then I can actually open the refrigerator and take a soda, because that concept is called rugel. There also is a concept in halacha called einoi makpid. And einoi makpid means sometimes it's universally accepted. Everybody understands and everybody agrees that that's a practice that everybody does. That's called universally accepted. So universally accepted practice, if it's pretty simple when you go into somebody's house, you're allowed to turn on the light, right? Nobody would say you shouldn't turn on the light. Would also be an exception to the rule, which brings us to the third case, the case of the talit, the talis that we're speaking about. So in Masechtas Chulin, there's a Rush who quotes the following case. Why don't we do? I'll actually do the actual case, right? So I flew in from New York this morning. I actually was able to time my flights that I was able to daven Vatikin, right, by pretty early this morning, right? We started prayers this morning 4:55 a.m. 5:25 was Nate's. I was easily able to make a 7:30 flight to get here, right? That's pretty simple, right? What would happen if I came and I would have missed the prayers and I forgot my talit and I forgot my tefillin and I walked here into the Miami area and I don't have a talit, I don't have a tefillin. Can I just walk into the synagogue and take anybody's talit and tefillin, talis and tefillin and use it? Well, yes. So why yes?
Because you're going to use it, but then you're going to put it back.
Well, you're a step ahead of me. You're a step ahead of me. But why am I allowed to? Why is it not called stealing?
People want you to use the item for mitzvah.
So there's a concept Nicha leila inish lemevet mitzvah b'mamayna. Right? People want mitzvahs to be done with their money. So since people want it, let's understand it. We have some real andanim here. There's a Ktsois, right? One of the most brilliant writers on Choshen Mishpat was the Ktsois. He explains the principle. What does the principle mean? Nicha. Nicha means that it becomes an automatic understanding and an acceptance that every person in this situation gave you permission. But remember, it's Yishloi Midas. So I'll repeat what the Ktsois says. Gave you permission beforehand. Because I, in my mind mentally, want you to appreciate my items for a mitzvah that is like I gave you permission beforehand. But there is a caveat, and the caveat is what you mentioned. What's the exception to the rule? What's the caveat? Huh? What's that? The tefillin, why is it a problem? Oh, if it's makpid is the caveat. What does it mean if it's makpid is the caveat? Caveat is that if I'm concerned that my item is going to get ruined, then you're not allowed to take it without permission. So the tefillin is actually the example. So, go ahead. You want to know if you yotze from a tefillin perspective or from a tefillin perspective? Right. Well, do you plan to redo the tefillin? If you redo it, you definitely can't use it because that's definitely makpid, right? But if not, there would be a bit of a problem, right? There'd be a shas at chag. Definitely be a shas at chag. But listen, let's not go into the subject of tefillin in this discussion, okay? So far we covered two principles. One principle is a principle that using another person's possession without permission is considered stealing. That's the first concept that we're using. Unless there is a standard accepted permission, or unless it's common that all people give permission in this situation. For example, when it would come to a mitzvah, or if it's something very minor that's acceptable, those are the cases that you are allowed to do it. Go ahead.
Well, what about the situation where the guy that took your raincoat by mistake? That's
right.
Not stealing, correct?
I would say it's a problem, and I would say you technically need. I would decide exactly the way you decided. I would not take the person's raincoat, because what's going to happen is he's going to come home, he's going to come back for his raincoat, right. And then he's going to say, "Where's my raincoat?" Although there was a great writer, his name was the Aruch HaShulchan, was a great writer. His name was Rabbi Epstein. He was an active rabbi for 60 years in Russia, and he very, very noted in Psak. Actually, Ramosha Feinstein, who was one of the greatest authorities in the United States in the last 70 years, when he conflicted with the Aruch HaShulchan, would tilt in his direction because he said he was an active rabbi for 60 years in actual practice. He actually writes that in his town, everybody came every Shabbat to shul or every day to shul with galoshes because it was muddy out in Russia. And he said people would take each other's galoshes. And he was okay with it, he said, because it was common that people would exchange galoshes. So those are the sort of the basic subjects that we start the discussion with. So why don't we talk a bit, I was lucky enough to meet a patent attorney, but 1 second, go ahead. What's your question? Yes, and I'm going to say the answer to that is yes, and I'll tell you why. It's common that in a home, a child can open the refrigerator and give something out. So that will go under the category of what's commonly accepted or ruggle. That will be an automatic acceptance. So you don't have to be makpid on that very specific point. Go ahead. No, I would go a step further. I would allow a child to take it out of the refrigerator because that's a common way that people conduct their home. Okay? Why don't we take these concepts and start to get involved in a couple of more difficult concepts. So, you know what? I'm more than glad. We have another 15 minutes. Any subjects you want, but we got to meet a patent attorney, as I want to speak about that. I have to tell you, actually, there was a great question posed to me in the beginning when I walked in. A fellow approached me just about the following question, and if we're talking about moral concept and finances, this is something we should definitely put out there. So there's a fellow that interacted with a non-Jewish company where he contracted them to do a certain amount of work. Thereafter, he extended the amount of work that was necessary, and when they sent him the bill, they didn't send him the bill for the full amount, they only sent him the bill for the original contract. He came over earlier and he said to me, So what's the story? Am I allowed to keep the money, or do I need to actually notify them and say, you know, you missed something on the bill? Now, if it's somebody Jewish, obviously you have an obligation to return it. And the reason you have an obvious obligation to return it is because it's become Hashavas Haveda. You must return it. If it's somebody non-Jewish, it's a concept in halacha called tos akim, a mistake made by a non-Jew. You can never fool a non-Jew in a business transaction. Absolutely not. You're not allowed to. You can't steal from a non-Jew. Absolutely not allowed. A mistake made by a non-Jew is a question in the Gemara, and the Shulchan Aruch actually says that tos akim, a person is allowed to keep. So, as a simple response to this fellow that posed the question, I said to him, you can keep the money. However, here's your caveat, and your caveat is as follows. On the side of Shulchan Aruch, there are footnotes. The footnotes are from the Be'er HaGoyla. And the Be'er HaGoyla says the following: it can't be that you fooled him. He has to have fooled himself, right? That's part of the halacha. So on the side of the footnotes, there is a Be'er HaGoyla. And the Be'er HaGoyla says the following case. He says, many people have become wealthy from ta'ut akim, from mistakes that were made by goyim. And he writes, and I'm telling you from my experience, that they did not keep that money. Eventually they lost it. They did not retain that money. He says, however, there were many who returned tos akim with a davar chashiv, a significant amount of money, and you should know thereafter they became wealthy. And his language is v'hinichi yisram lo'ilolam. They left their money over to their children. So I said to this fellow who posed the question, I may say to you in halacha you don't have to return it, but let me tell you something, I'll be partners with you. He didn't promise me commission, this fellow. I'm not getting commission, but I would definitely say that from the Kiddush Hashem perspective, which comes with such a skula, you should definitely return it. And the reason I mention this, because today it's become a unique case. It used to be that it happened all the time. Every time you went to a store, you got something extra, so there was discussion. Today it doesn't work this way, because when you call back the woman who picks up the phone at Amazon, and you say, I got 2 pairs of shoes instead of 1, and you say, I would like to make a Kiddush Hashem by returning it, she says, keep it, it's too hard to do restocking here. That's the quick response you're going to get. So it's a very, very special case, this case that was mentioned. Moving along, and then we'll actually go...
Does this also apply with a government agency or government entity?
Government agency is a very complicated question. I'll tell you why it's a very complicated question. Number one, you're starting to deal with Chil Hashem.
Also, they don't know you're Jewish.
No, Chil Hashem. Chil Hashem means that if they catch a person doing something wrong, it'll become a Chil Hashem. Just if you want to understand the basic halacha, listen, I encourage everyone to pay all their taxes, and I encourage everybody to... Yeah. What's that?
I wasn't talking about taxes. I was talking about other situations.
Generally speaking, we see... Yeah, but I just said, we responded, it's a Chil Hashem. That was it. That was the answer. Finished. You know, you want to go with a raw Talmudic perspective? I'll give you a raw Talmudic perspective, and like this is no issue. The raw Talmudic perspective is similar to the concept of tos akim. You can't fool anybody. You can't lie. You can't write something incorrect. On the other hand, when you're in a situation where there is something that somebody doesn't know and therefore you're benefiting, it may be okay. I would strongly advise in today's environment nobody do anything of that sort, because in today's environment you see the amount of scrutiny that there is, and how today everything is recorded in a very different way than things were in the time of the Talmud. And not only that, one clear halacha, it says by all these cases, that when it comes to Chil Hashem, it's not allowed, and most of these cases eventually become a Chil Hashem. So it's definitely unadvisable.
And does it make a difference if you're acting on behalf of someone and not yourself?
Well, you yourself, I would say no difference on that specific point. Let's just cover another couple of cases here. So it's very fascinating that when you take out the Svarim, you know, it's one of the things which is strongly referenced, that opening up another person's sefer, another person's book without permission is not acceptable. And the reason is, even though the case of the Talis, and by the way, yes, I do note that there are those that say that today people are finicky, you don't want somebody else's Talis to go in your head. The Shevet HaLevi, Rabbi Vosner, wrote a tshuva. He says if a person's makbid, the halacha changes. I note that. But by Svarim, they somehow were much more stringent and they didn't allow it. And the reason was because they were not readily available. Svarim used to get ruined, and if the item gets ruined, suddenly there's no nicha, there's no automatic acceptance when it came to a mitzvah. Now, I want to ask you just a classic question, and it'll actually tie back into this whole discussion. So, I have a class. Before I come, I take a picture of a book. I make copies of a chapter of a book. I walk into my classroom, and I teach that chapter to my classroom. Had I not made that copy, I would have had to go out and purchase 30 textbooks. Am I allowed to do that or not? The answer was a no. I'm going to pose the question a little differently. I want to see the answer I get to this question. How about if I take a picture of one page, and the page I took a picture was simply a paragraph to make it easier for my students, but I definitely would not have purchased the book for that one paragraph. Is that acceptable? What would you say to that? You would say no again. Okay. There actually are 2 Jews, 3 opinions. There are 6 opinions in the Achrayim on this question. Maybe I can try to narrow down what the
You're thinking that you're going to change the functional mind, and it's just going to be one paragraph, and that's it. You're not going to write a book. That's what you're thinking.
I hear your point. I'm going to say it depends on what I'm doing. What I'm doing, right? You know, a lot of times we think things, but our result is different. Let me talk in a moment about what we're doing. I'm going to ask you a different question. I'll tell you a real live din Torah that I once had. I'm going to leave all the names out, even though you may figure out the names by the time we're done. This very famous singer, one of the most famous singers of our time, had a din Torah in Al Bezdin. The din Torah went as follows. Let me tell you the case. So there was a fellow on Shabbat morning. It was a great Bal Tefillah. He was a good chazan. He had a beautiful voice. He composed a song. He walked into the shul, and he sang this song by Shachrit, by the prayers. He sang this song in the morning. And after he sang this song, this great composer, singer that was in the room, went out, put the song on. In those days, it was called a tape. I don't know if any of you remember what that was, a tape. Not 8-track. I'm not that old. There was a tape, and sold it. So the other person took him to the Torah, and he says, hold on, that song belongs to me. You heard it from me. So I'm going to ask you a question to everybody here. What do you say to that case? Does the song belong to him because he sang it? You better answer that question. Are you going to help me out with that one or not? What's that?
He's got to have permission to sing it or to use the tune for whatever you're saying.
Can I ask you a question? Can I walk out of here and repeat what you told me without permission? So you don't own what you just said to me. So if you sing a song, why do you own the song?
Commercial value.
Huh?
The song gets commercial value.
Commercial value.
Not about singing.
That's Ramosha Feinstein's opinion, 1 out of 6. We're getting to 1 out of 6. Ramosha Feinstein says, it's a very important concept to understand halacha, and it's something we really should, I'm just touching on the subject, that intellect is only owned when it's monetized. So you put in a lot of work, you produce it, and then a person steals it. So what would be the case? So that was actually, everybody here answered the question correctly when I spoke about the case where Divrei Torah, words of Torah, belong to nobody. As a matter of fact, God says, just like I'm for free, my Torah is for free. Nobody owns the Torah, nobody here. On the other hand, if a person took the Torah, put it into a typesetting, invested money, he advertised, he monetized it, at that point, if you compete with him, you're taking something away with him. So raw intellect in halacha has no ownership of raw intellect. I'm not saying everybody said that. There is a tshuva, there's a sefer called Shoili Meishiv. The Shoili Meishiv was written by Rabbi Yosef Shol Natanzin, one of the greatest authorities in the 1800s. And in his discussion, he actually says, that can't be the Torah's view, because there was a Jew, his name was Reb Moshe Harashov, who made a calculator. That's what he writes. And the government paid him royalties for the rest of his life. Now you know who made the Jewish calculator, okay? And he says, can it be that the Torah will award us less than law? That doesn't look proper for our Torah. Most poskim disagreed with him, and most said, your intellect in a non-monetized form does not belong to you. So just throwing out some of those concepts. I'm going to throw out another concept, okay? This concept actually is going to start merging together the different principles that we discussed till now. And if anybody wants to conclude by asking a few questions, it will be my pleasure. We'll just throw out one more concept. So we suddenly have... What's that?
Did he invest into it?
Oh, the psak on the song? Firstly, the singer argued and said I heard the song before he sang it. So I can't tell you, on that. But the real answer is that when you sing a song, you don't own it. If you compose a song and you go to a studio and you work hard and you put it onto a disc and you market it, that's where Moshe's argument. Now, I'm not saying the Sholem Meshav actually held that intellect is something which is private. What?
Composing a song, putting the notes, editing, putting out, that's not called time. That's not a zero monetary value.
Again, how do you own it?
This guy's mooching off his work.
But I asked the question, if you go out and repeat my shir, did I own my shir?
No.
I worked on the shir for more than 6 hours, by the way. Huh? Right?
No, you're saying much. You say that if you invested time into it.
I want to tell you something. There are endless amount of cases, and actually this discussion really is for another time because it actually breaks down into 6 different areas in halacha. Specifically, quantum merit is one that all lawyers know about, or unjust enrichment, right? Can I become rich off your money? In halacha, we call this concept mishtarshi. Mishtarshi means, does value automatically transfer over to the next person, which is a concept called mishtarshi, which is quantum merit. There was a story by the Noda B'Yehuda. I'll just read this beautiful story that took place. There was a fellow, it's the Shuv Noda B'Yehuda, I think it's Simcha Daled, wrote a sefer on Kachim, on 2 volumes of the Talmud. And on the bottom, he wrote a pirish, an explanation. He sold it. Back in the day, when you wanted a sefer printed, you went to the typesetter, and they had to painstakingly take every letter and actually put it on a sheet of metal. That was the way they did it, right? In Yiddish, the word is a zetzer. Why was it called a zetzer? Because they had to bang on those letters, right? That's the way it worked. The zetzer was the typesetter. And right after he was done, somebody else took those plates before he can disregard it, and took them and actually printed a Talmud, a Shas. And he came back and he said, quantum merit. What does that mean, quantum merit? The benefit of those plates that I produced for a totally different sefer still belongs to me. And the Noda B'Yehuda actually felt he was right. And he says, yes, there is a concept in halacha called quantum merit, because we said before a concept, zeh nehene v'zeh lo chasa. What does it mean, zeh nehene v'zeh lo chasa? Everybody wins, nobody loses. But when somebody's actually with money out of pocket and somebody actually lost, then you have a problem, and then you actually have to share it. I'm going to go back for a second. We spoke before about yish on yish. A concept means giving up. I'm just going to throw out another question because I heard from Mr. Stock that his firm works in the bankruptcy area. There's a complex question in halacha. There's a concept called yish. Yish means to give up. So giving up on something that you lost, we understand that you can give up the rights to. How about if I lend you money? And you come and you knock on my door and you say, can you please return the money? And what do I say to you? Tomorrow, next week. You've heard this. I'm sure everybody in this room has heard those stories. And after, checks in the mail, right? I'll call you back, right? 3 years later, the lender says, I give up. And then you find out that the guy that borrowed the money won the lottery. So, can you still go after him for the money? Is there a concept of yish in a chayv? Most poskim say the answer is no, other than Rabbi Yaakov Emden actually. Because when it comes to a chayv, the definition of a chayv means chayv is an obligation to repay. I don't lose my obligation to repay because you gave up collecting from me. So let me just bring this subject full circle and go back and throw out one more. What's that? A Shabbos Aved is a bit different. So why is a Shabbos Aved a bit different? Because the guy that lost it, and that's why I spoke in the beginning of the shir, what's important is how it gets into my pocket in the first place. So by a Shabbos Aved, it got into my pocket because you lost it. It got to me beheter. If it got to me after yish, the yish sticks. In this case, it got to me be'isser. Why be'isser? Because I borrowed money with an obligation to repay. Go ahead. Go ahead. Right.
Scan a portion of it, use it in your presentation that you're presenting in front of 200 people. So you have a large screen.
Right, and you're using it, yeah.
And you're using a portion
I would say I would say that's definitely a better case. I agree with you because there you actually paid for the book. But ultimately speaking, most halachic experts, their position is that if the amount of the picture that you took is not an amount that I would have purchased the book because of it, for that one single item, you know, I'm not going to say all because there was a great writer, his name was the Beis Yitzchak, Rabbi Yitzchak Shmelkish. He actually said that halacha has to mirror patent law. And if the intellectual property says it's not okay, you can't do it. Many others take the position in halacha that the way we view it is a bit different, that it's the loss of a sale. That's where the halacha kicks in. It happens to be that if you're really at the cutting edge of business today, even the Goyish world has been changing up these concepts where suddenly they're leasing the item to you rather than selling the item to you. And when they're leasing the item, especially in the music industry, it's become a big deal. And when they're leasing it rather than selling it, so what do they accomplish? You can lease with terms, which brings us to a different concept in halacha called shir. Shir, which is another concept in halacha. Okay, can I? Oh, we're out of time, so let's stop right over here. Rabbi, it's been a very big pleasure to speak to all of you, and thank you for listening. And anybody has any questions, come over. Have a wonderful day. Thank you for sponsoring.
We'll have mincha in 15 minutes, 2 o'clock.